big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
30 days till the draft, even less than that at this point. The Bears are mired in uncertainty. They are the ultimate wild card inside the top 10. Probably the best team picking in the top 10 simply because they have so many pieces on the roster already to go from worst to first in 2025. Welcome into the Halas beat. Usayd Koshul, Nick Whalen here. You can check us out on Twitter at _Nick Whalen, at Usayd Koshul, and at Halas beat. I mean, Nick, I don't know about you, but Will Campbell has put a hell of a lot of people, more specifically, I think, on Bears Twitter, on notice. James Pierce Jr. is a wild card for me as well. And then the 72nd overall pick. I mean, no one's even talking about it because everyone's focused on 10, 39, 41. But where do we go from here? Because it's so much to unpack, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a lot. And honestly, the Will Campbell measurement thing just put me on a little bit of a tilt. And I got after it at Bears Twitter probably today and yesterday. So I take full responsibility, everybody. Okay, first off, I've talked about this before. I feel like Bears fans have some PTSD about the offensive line and, Justin getting hit all the time and Caleb getting hit all the time. The O-line is very different. So like fixing left tackle isn't something that we need to do. It's a want. It's not a need. And I knew I heard this at one point. So like I go through all the press conferences today. I was like, oh, found it. Got a video clip, posted it. And it was a question by Courtney Cronin asking about like having the two new guys there, like what kind of schemes and stuff can they run in terms of the two guards. This is before they signed Drew Dahmer. They could announce it. And in the presser, Ben Johnson's like, yeah, having Joe and Jonah there, it's going to be great. This is also, I like that room. He says, I really like what we got in Darnell. I really like what we got in Braxton. And then he said the rest of that room. Okay. He named Braxton Joe. It's like, I don't think you just name a guy if you're like, you know what? We're going to draft his replacement at 10. What do you think?
You're not wrong, but I will say this, like, to Ben Johnson's credit, I mean, he was in the NFC North for whatever the last 4 years with the Detroit Lions. And so to kind of even longer than that, because I think he was in Detroit from 2019 to about 2024, obviously stayed under Dan Campbell. But you kind of look at it, and again, the inner dynamics of a football team and a staff, the way that things work sometimes is the offensive guy is always going to be on the headset with the defense, kind of providing some sort of intel and input as to what, specific player on the offense is doing when that team's defense is on the field. And that's why, you kind of really see that. I mean, you see it with 31 other teams. You never saw it with the Bears where the offensive coordinator was providing intel to the defensive guru of a head coach in Matt Eberflus, which I know is slightly getting off topic, but the point still stands. You never saw it. And so I kind of look at this whole thing and I'm like, maybe Ben Johnson is looking at the offensive line right now and saying, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. In the sense of, we feel pretty good about what Braxton Jones can do. I feel like, again, so let's just say I'm paraphrasing what Ben Johnson says here. I feel like he hasn't been developed as much as he should, especially for a guy who has been the biggest success story of this regime, going from fifth round pick to 3-year starter. So there's a lot of meat left on that bone. Whereas you would much rather, to me, have that consistency in a year where you have to be aggressive and have to win, because you can't waste Caleb Williams' rookie contract. Or do you go with Will Campbell, right? So I think a lot of that is just the fact of, hey, Braxton, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's go ahead and let's just stick it out with the guy that we have. And if we feel like he's not the guy moving forward, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to upgrade next year, which next year's offensive tackle class is expected to be significantly better.
Way better. Yeah, way better. So, yeah, there's so much to unpack with this. So, One thing that baffles me with this, but I'm not even getting to Will Campbell yet. I'm just going to stay with Braxton, y'all. Is I see this all the time. People are like, well, we don't want to pay Braxton this amount of money. And I'm like, how did we get here? Remember, it was like, we just need good players on the Bears. And now it's like, we don't want to pay a left tackle so much money that's young. Like, to me, like, because he's not good enough. We could get better. It's just so, it's funny for me because it's like, we want to keep our good young players. And now it's like, we're too good for you. I'm thinking of like Mean Girls, you can't sit with us, one of those things. All right. The Will Campbell thing is this, y'all. The arm length, the wingspan. I got the with the video of Will Campbell saying, for 2 years no one said anything about it, etc. And if my arms aren't long, it doesn't mean I'm not good. That's not the case. The case is you can be good in college football. The NFL is a different animal, and it's about projecting the best odds of him being successful and in what position. That's what the NFL does. And that's why players get moved all the time. That's why Kyler Gordon's in the slot versus outside corner. He was a successful outside corner. He'd be a better slot. That's why he's there. Like that, those things happen. And so that's why Peter Skoronski got kicked in from out left tackle to guard. That's why Zach Martin is a Hall of Fame guard. He was a tackle at Notre Dame. You can go down. Joe Tooney on the Bears, tackle in college. Moved into guard. All these guys, I think, were all Americans. At least 2 of the 3 were. So Will Campbell's arm length is 32 and 5/8. The pro day, it got stretched to 33. Didn't do anything else. Maybe they were doing a lot of stretching. Who knows? And then his wingspan is historically low. I think there's been 4 players since like off the tackles since like 2010. Maybe 2000 that have had shorter wingspans, but none of them have like stuck in the NFL. So why does this matter? Okay. The point of contact, like when you have a pass rusher coming at you, you have to initially stop their initial momentum. Then there's going to be counter moves off of that, right? And then you're constantly working your hand placement, your feet to kind of get in the way. If your distance to him is shorter because of your arm length, he could get into your chest or one arm you before you can get hit and punch him and stop his momentum. That's an issue, okay? But then the width is an issue too because there's, pass rush lanes, running lanes, and the more narrow you are in terms of his wingspan, so I'm assuming this means his shoulders are narrow as well as his arms are short, means he can't help in terms of twists and stunts as well, reaching there off of, his initial pass set. But there's kind of a lot to that. I also have seen a little bit where he reaches a little bit in run blocking because he can't quite get there because, again, the length. So I'm not saying he's a bad player, but I'm saying these things can affect him if it's a little bit in college. It's going to be very different when you're going up against Montez Sweats of the world. So it looks like he should be a guard. That's what, I think I counted, man, there's 4 offensive tackles below 33-inch arm length in the NFL. None of them with a short wingspan like that. And you're just playing the odds. That's 6.25%. So, like, yes, can you be short and be a good quarterback, Drew Brees? Yes. Can you make it as a slow wide receiver, be Anquan Bolden or Jerry Rice? Yes. But the odds are just against you. So spending the 10th pick on an outlier to play left tackle, I think it's tough. It's tough to say that. If it was for guards, sure, but I think we've signed, or we're going to sign Tooney, so we have both guards set up already.
And so that's part of my other, I guess, argument here is it's like, hey, if you're going to take a offensive lineman at 10th overall, number one, that player better be ready to start from day one. Any player you take in the top 10 should be ready to start day one. Besides quarterback, because again, that's the one position that's an exception. But then also the other big thing to me that I kind of look at is it's like, hey, you really going to tell the guy that's a 3-year starter, oh, well, we are now going to go ahead and we're now going to replace you. So much of offensive line, and then again, if you do take Will Campbell, is he really going to beat out Joe Tooney or Jonah Jackson for either of the guard spots? Because he sure as hell is not beating out Drew Dalman. And like we were just having this conversation at the dinner table, the Bears' issues last year were not the skill position players. Going back to 2024, Yep. It was not the defense. It was solely the trenches, but even more so, more important, like, all right, the D-line, at least you had Austin Booker and Javon Dexter and Andrew Billings for some time, right? Montez Sweat. The bigger issue was the O-line because they couldn't protect anybody. And so now there's kind of becomes this forte of like consistency in a sense of, do you expect the guy that's going into his 4th year to pick up Ben Johnson's system faster? then maybe you'd expect a first-year rookie to come in and do it, because that ultimately, to me, is part of the entire equation here. The other big thing is that you could take any running back from any system, plug him into what Ben Johnson's going to do. You could take any wide receiver for the most part in football from any system, whatever offense they came from, whether it was air raid, whether it was spread, whether it was run and shoot, whatever it was, successfully translates to the NFL. You can't do that with tight ends. You cannot do that with offensive linemen. Because in this scheme that Ben Johnson's going to run, I mean, these old linemen are going to have to pull and get out in space. And if you're not fast enough to do that, I mean, that right there is going to kind of take your running game down a notch. It's also going to start to hurt your passing game as well. So again, this whole thing to me, I kind of look at and I'm like, Will Campbell, I last summer would have lobbied for him based on where the Bears were picking. I still think he can be really good for any team, especially the Bears, if the Bears do pick him. But at the end of the day, is he my first choice based off other recent roster acquisitions? No. If the Bears were sitting at 10th overall, which they are, and Jonah Jackson or Joe Tooney were not on the roster, I would be sitting here saying,
exactly.
Will Campbell, Will Campbell, Will Campbell. But because they made these other moves, it just doesn't make sense. Which Jonah Jackson, they signed him to an extension. So that tells me they're ready to have him start for at least the next 2 years. Joe Tooney's more of a wait and see, but then again, you're not taking offensive lineman at 10 to sit him for a year. And then to me, at least, you're not taking an offensive lineman at 39 or 41 to sit him a year.
Right. And two other things with this, and we can, move on. I'm sure people have heard about this stuff on Twitter, but one is the average length for an offensive tackle at right tackle is 34.5-inch arms, and left tackle's 34 and I think a quarter. So it's not even like it's 33, y'all. Are there some that are 33 and successful? Yes. But again, even those guys are outliers. So there's even another inch there that he's not going to have. And we're not even talking about the wingspan there. The other one is this, Usayd. And I pose this, right? And I think this is kind of what kind of ends the discussion. Because some people are like, dude, watch his film, et cetera. I'm like, okay, if Will Campbell was a franchise left tackle, and there was no doubts about him, he's not going to fall to 10 overall in a weak draft class. He's just not.
Yeah, just saying there are some people out there, last passive-aggressive point I'm going to make before we talk James Pierce Jr. There are some people out there who fully believe that this conversation would not be happening right now. We wouldn't even need to have it if they took Olu Fashanu over Rome Odunze last year. But what do I know, right? Look, I'm just saying, y'all can hate me for it, but that is something that I like. Rome had nothing but positive interactions with him in the locker room. We will one day, when we have time, I will get to a story about a player who answered the phone as I was interviewing him after the game. But can
I ask you something? I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's go in this dream world. Okay, Usayd Koshul's the GM. They go Olu Fashanu. Okay. Mm-hmm. So then they have their third round pick and they do whatever with it instead of Karan Amagaji. Would you go Tet McMillan at 10 if he was there?
I don't know if I'd go Tet McMillan at 10. And part of it is because if we're basing it off last year's draft, right? Let's just say you go Olu Fashanu at 10 or 9 overall, right?
Right.
Then based on last year, just the way that things kind of happen in the draft, I mean, I would probably, to be fully honest with you, Tet McMillan in this draft class would have been my guy, but I also kind of look at it and I'm like, it would have made a lot of sense for the Bears to, possibly take a receiver in the third round last year. So that's at least what I would have, gone ahead and done. But
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that I'm getting steered more towards all the time, and this is going to kind of go into both of our next discussions, is I love Ashton Genty, y'all. Okay, love him. Before this came on, I was looking at his 2023 film, and I love this 2023 film. Obviously, 2024 was awesome, but he did some stuff in 2023, a lot more receiving that just has me excited about his overall game. I'm moving more and more towards running back waiting because it's so deep. Maybe that's a thing at 72, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But going defensive line potentially at 10 or trading down going D-line. And I'm a big Mike Green fan, right? I don't know the off the field stuff. I'm going to let the NFL teams investigate and figure that stuff out. But I do have some insight into another guy with off the field stuff, and this is James Pierce Jr. So again, not going to out my sources, but know somebody down there at Tennessee, and I asked, I was like, hey, look, what's going on with this? Because this is what we've heard, and I'm not even sure exactly what the rumor is. Something about like coaches, aren't sad to see him go or not coachable or something like that was the rumor. But anyway, so asked him, and he says he thinks that someone that wants to take Pierce high planted this. And he said that he's really no different than any of the other defenders, and that doesn't mean that he's like, the nicest guy ever, but I don't think that means that he's, a problem. And again, that's just, someone that I know what they told me. So we're going to find out in terms of both Mike Green and James Pierce Jr. in terms of what these off the field stuff things are based on when they go in the draft, because there are some times when there are things and then boom, they fall like a rock. It's late round 1, it's round 2, it's round 3. Sometimes they don't do well. But then sometimes it's like Justin Houston. He has a great career, and I think that was a substance abuse thing, but then he, does fine. Jalen Carter, right? We are all aware of that one, and he's done pretty well in Philly, So we'll see what's going on there and what the truth of it is based off of their draft stock. But I thought that was useful information. And James Pierce Jr. looks good on film, man. I don't know if you've watched him, but like, man, that guy can get after the quarterback.
I totally agree with you there. So going back to the Olu thing, Rome Odunze thing, last thing I'll say is listen, people.
Sure.
Rome's going to be really good. Olu Fashanu's going to be really good. You really could not have gone wrong there with either one, but knowing the way that the offensive line was so bad last year, I for sure would have gone with Olu Fashanu because I also believe that you can get a good receiver in rounds 2 and 3 if you draft and develop properly. Because last year's receivers class has the potential to kind of set the stage in the league for the years to come. It's actually, to me, has a chance to be much better than the Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase classes, which we saw come in, back to back. But okay, here is my big thing with James Pierce Jr. So if you go back, and I've got spreadsheets somewhere of preseason rankings, meaning June, July, August rankings in college football, James Pierce Jr., just to refresh people's memory, was being labeled as the top guy in the draft before Abdul Carter burst onto the scene. And really, it became a sort of 1A, 1B situation. It was basically, well, what do you prefer? Do you prefer Abdul Carter? Do you prefer James Pierce Jr.? Do you prefer the guy in James Pierce Jr. that has elite athleticism, freaking really good traits, has the potential to be a damn good game changer for the next 15 years in your defense once he hits? Or do you prefer the hybrid linebacker edge type guy in Micah Parsons, in Abdul Carter, who is basically a Micah Parsons light, because he's not as crazy athletic as Micah, but you certainly see a lot of the shades there. And that's why I think it was really a 1A, 1B type situation. Liken it to I know people don't like me for bringing this name up, but like the Joe Alt versus Olu Fashanu argument of who's 1A, who's 1B type argument. At the end of the day, though, the big thing with edge rushers is it's all about scheme for me. Now, I will say this, Abdul Carter, scheme transcendent talent. The interesting part about James Pierce Jr. is that you look at him, and I still think, even with all the off-field concerns, that there is a chance that he's the number 2 edge rusher off the board. But I also look at him, and I kind of say, hey, 6'5", 245, right? 10-inch hands, about 33-inch arms almost. I mean, and then he ran a 4.40, right? So there is a legitimate chance to me that it may take him a full season to realize his potential. But he, to me, I think really has a chance to be the Khalil Mack of this class, in the sense of he'll come in his first year, have a really good year, And then second season, he'll kind of pop off and be talked about as one of the elite defenders in the game.
Yeah, and that's the one thing is that, you go and you look at his arms. He's got that arm sleeve. It looks like he's got, like Max Crosby arms, but they're not actually that long. But great athlete, and the thing that I always keep going back and forth on is this a Dennis Allen type DN? Like, is Dennis Allen only going to get these super long, super big DNs, like a Landon Jackson, etc., Shamar Stewart, Michael Williams, or is he going to be able to get one where, hey, this is going to be a designated pass rusher that's going to come in, and we're going to have, Dio and Montez on regular downs. So that's going to be kind of interesting. But both those guys are really good. At 72, man, because, I know we have all these other picks, but we don't talk about 72 a lot. 72 is still a good player. I know Zach Pickens was a guy, didn't work out too well. I feel like 72 could be, I have one of three positions in my head. Maybe you have some other ones. I think 72 could be a time. That's when they take their D tackle, because D tackle is deep. And it's not like a huge need right now because you have three good guys, hoping that Andrew Billings gets healthy. So you could have, that could be a one tech there. That could be a three tech. Doesn't matter. That could be at 72. The one guy I like that's rising for me is CJ West out of Indiana. People haven't seen him yet. I think he's a dog. So D tackle is one of them. Another one is tight end. So if they don't go tight end early, I think that could be that, there's a couple of guys there, one from LSU, one from Miami, I think could fit there, both very different types of tight ends. But that's that range where you start seeing tight ends and you're like, what the heck is this guy getting drafted in the second, third round? But as you're talking about, they fit a part in a scheme in an offense. And the last one's running back. You could see one of those running backs fall to 72, but also there's like Dylan Sampson, there's Cam Scattaboo, there's Devin Neal that I like there's RJ Harvey. Like, there's quite a few running backs that could go in that 72 range. So in my mind, those are the three positions. A stretch for me would be wide receiver, but we'll see.
Let's talk that third round pick for the Bears, because I believe under Ryan Poles, the Bears have had 72, 74, and 75, right? So it's kind of been in that like early to mid 70s range. But so you look back at the last three third round picks Ryan Poles had. So it was Velus Jones Jr., Zach Pickens, Karana Magaji. Now, there's a commonality between all three of these guys that has slowly become a trend, in the sense that all three of them are, to me, high risk, high reward type players. All of them are also guys that kind of flew under the radar. And if you go back and you look at like a lot of the previous mock drafts, no one was really talking about Kiran in the third round, right? It was always, well, he's a day 3 pick. Velus Jones Jr., a guy that I don't really ever feel like got the hype. And I think we're looking at it now for good reason too. Same with Zach Pickens. And so to me, it's very interesting because Ryan Poles loves to take these sort of high risk, high reward guys in the third round, knowing that he feels like it's the spot where I can get a future starter. But for right now, I'm getting a player that is not going to go ahead and that is not going to start for me day one. Like, again, I ultimately see it that way. And so you kind of look at it there, and I certainly see this, to like your point earlier about, do you wait until round 2 or 3 to take a running back? I do believe running back's a legit possibility. Ashton Genty, not a real option. Either of the Ohio State guys, not legitimate options either, in Henderson and Judkins. Omarion Hampton, probably going to be the second guy off the board. But don't rule out any of the Ohio State guys as being the second and third guys off the board, because when we talk to people at Ohio State, I mean, those guys, pretty solid pro day, if you ask me. Mm-hmm. And the Bears love their Ohio State prospects, by the way. That's the one Big Ten school that they always seem to send the head coach and the GM to. Mm-hmm. So the other big thing I think to keep in mind is this, is let's just say you go with a D lineman at 72. That's where, to me, it makes the most sense, because you are going to be ultimately getting a guy that is going to come in and, again, is going to be that very high risk, high reward type prospect that can do what Karana Magaji did, that can do what Zach Pickens did, which is sit on the bench, marinate for a year, sort of go ahead and develop. Why? Because you've got Grady Jarrett in front of you, Javon Dexter's in front of you, Andrew Billings is in front of you. Mm-hmm. And so now it kind of becomes this entire thing of, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea taking a defensive lineman. Maybe it also wouldn't be a bad idea saying, forget running backs in round 1 or round 2, simply because round 1 and 2, this draft is really where you're going to address edge rusher plus some of your other needs like trenches. Let's go ahead. Let's take a playmaker with that 72nd overall pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that you think of positional value, running back at 72 would make so much more sense. I mean, that's where David Montgomery got drafted, y'all. If we want to think of that range of a player, and that, the risk, the reward is, okay, if the running back doesn't work out, you didn't waste a first or second round pick on one. That is interesting. I haven't thought about the Bears who they've taken before. The only one of those three I think in that range makes sense. Karan, I thought, made sense in round 3. The other two were definite reaches. I was like, who is Zach Pickens? I remember that. I was like, I did not have him going that early at all.
Well, Zach's case study is real. I don't even know if I would say it's really interesting, but it's kind of an exception because they had met with Zach at the Combine in 2023, but Zach was being labeled as like a 3rd, 4th round pick. And so it's kind of one of those where, again, not a lot of people kind of knew that they had met with Zach Pickens, but the Bears have kind of met with him in Indy and been quietly doing their homework on him. But it's like, you kind of look at it and you're like, okay, well, that really does seem to be the spot where there's a lot of high risk, high reward type guys. Because ultimately, let's just say your 3rd round pick hits. Now you got a guy that's not even making $2 million a year that is under contract for at least 3 seasons, assuming that in year 2, 3, and 4 he hits, that you are basically getting for chump change, right? Mm-hmm. And that part, and that to me really speaks to the greater point of roster construction, going back to our last episode, which I know we're at 27 minutes, but we're recording this after hours, so we are going to go a little bit longer today because there's more to talk about. So that to me also kind of speaks to the fact that it's like maybe that 3rd round pick is a lot more valuable than we're making it out to be. Because a lot of times, like, you look at this class and it's like 10, 39, 41. Well, cool, those are the 3 high picks, and it's like, forget 72. But maybe the Bears can come away with something legitimate here with that 77nd overall pick.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, too, that because and again, people aren't, they listen to this, they follow me on Twitter, they know, I'm team against O-line at 10. I'm likely against O-line at 39 and 41 after the Jonah Jackson extension, and assuming Tooney's going to get extended, because I also still believe a little bit in Kron Amagaji. I'm one of the few people. I think 72 might be the first slot where O-line makes sense, where they could get a guy you're talking about to develop maybe a little bit. I would think more likely interior, maybe like a Marcus Mabo, maybe like a Tate Rutledge, maybe, Jared Wilson. I don't know if Jared Wilson has positional flexibility in terms of center and guard, but like a guy like that in that range, you draft, you develop, then you're talking about maybe year 3, they can take over for Joe Tooney. Maybe in year 3, maybe that's when they move on from Jonah Jackson. Something like that, I think, could make some sense too. But before that doesn't. So I think 72 actually has a lot of possibilities because, like, as you're talking about, you're not drafting 72 and be like, hey, this guy has to start right now. That's when the developmental things start. 10, you're hoping that it's a starter. 39, 41, you're hoping it's at least a high-end contributor in a rotation. 72 is not the case there.
Well, let me ask you this at 72 overall. Let's just say they go with running back, okay? Mm-hmm. Do you expect that running back to come in and start day 1? Because I'll be honest, to me, 72 running back at 72 is the one position that I could make an argument for where I'd be like, I can totally see them taking a running back at 72 and coming in and starting. But then again, you look at some of the other, that's the only position on the offense where I see it happening. I go back and forth with some of the players that are already on this roster, like a Tyler Scott at wide receiver. yeah, maybe, just maybe, you go ahead and take a wide receiver at 72 and hope that he's competing with Scott for wide receiver 3. But again, like, I would really love to see what Tyler Scott can do in a Ben Johnson offense, simply because I'll be honest with you, a lot of people may not realize this. Tyler didn't get a lot of opportunities last year. He got more his rookie year. But you talk to Tyler and you listen to him talk, and he's a guy that, isn't necessarily always going to be in front of the cameras and the media because he just wants to kind of go out there and play football. Tyler is the type of player to where he's incredibly instinctive, incredibly detailed, really smart. You ask him any sort of question, he's going to go ahead and give you a 3.5 minute answer. Like, he knows what the hell he's talking about. So he's one of those guys that's been underdeveloped. And so I look at receiver and I'm like, you're probably not going to take a receiver at 72. If you do, cool. But also running back's the only position that I'm like, if they take someone at 72, I do see him starting. But even that, like, starting as a part of a rotation.
Right. Yeah. To me, 10, you take Genty at 10. I am not team draft Omari and Hampton at 10. If people are, I'm against you there. I think you start that guy there. 39 at 41, I think, would be a little bit of a competition, at least within camp. And 72, I feel like it's one of those where Swift would start. The other guy, they would bring him along. And then if things happen mid-year where Swift is still not being efficient and you're not getting that 4.5 carries, which if people have heard that quote from Eric Bieniemy, you got to take the 4.5 yards when it's there. I could see it there. I just couldn't see it from week 1. Not because, like, past ones that have done it, David Montgomery, Chicago didn't have a lot in front of him. Matt Forte, who I loved coming out of Tulane, by the way, there wasn't a lot in his way. So he started week 1 against the Colts. Now they're paying. Now, again, I know this isn't Ben Johnson's guy per se, but they're paying Swift quite a bit of money. So it's tough to say, hey, we're going to dismiss him and bring in a brand new rookie to start, first snap week 1.
Okay, so you speak of dismissing DeAndre Swift. Now I have to ask you. When Swift had the 1 year under Ben Johnson as OC, I think it was, and then they traded him to Philly the next year. Are you one of those people that buys into that hype of, it's because he wasn't necessarily a scheme fit? Or do you kind of, which is why the Lions traded him to Philly? Or are you one of those people that's just like, hey, most of you need to probably spend 100 to 200 hours watching offensive line and running back tape and seeing how the run game sets the pass game up and learning the protections. I want to know because we've never talked about this.
No, we actually haven't. No, I'm of the camp of this. One, let's look at the timeline of events. Detroit had, I believe, 4 overall, traded down with Seattle. Seattle got Witherspoon, the corner. They moved out, I think, 12. And at 12, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. And people are like, whoa, what's going on? After that, they traded DeAndre Swift. If they don't draft Jahmyr Gibbs, DeAndre Swift is the running back in Detroit with Montgomery. So to me, I think that's part of it. And part of it, too, is that Gibbs is very different than Swift. And so, in terms of pure explosion, and again, that's not saying Swift isn't explosive, but have you seen Jahmyr Gibbs? Like, different player. And so to me, I think that they're like, hey, if we can get this kind of a playmaker at this spot, because if they absolutely loved him, they would have taken him at 4. But they knew the positional value of trading down, et cetera. So to me, that's where I think more of it comes into play. I do think that DeAndre Swift is not an efficient running back. I think that his vision is suspect at times. I think that his power, his legs go dead at contact, which bothers me. I think he could break more tackles. So there's more, I think, that probably, what do you call it, more meat left on the bone that Ben Johnson probably saw. But I don't think it's one of those things of where, like, I can't play with this guy. I think that's not the case at all.
Yeah, just
or I can't coach this guy. I can't utilize this guy is what I meant.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just saying, I'm gonna be upfront with y'all, okay? Jahmyr Gibbs is who so many people thought Trent Richardson was going to be from like 2012, 13, 14. If you guys remember former Bama running back Trent Richardson, like... Well,
I'm curious now because they're very different body types. I'm curious what you said.
Yeah, but I think that in terms of just the pure impact that Jahmyr Gibbs has had.
Oh, yeah.
I fully believe that that's who a lot of people thought Trent Richardson was also going to be. But I agree, they were 2 very different styles of players. But See, okay, to me, the other part of this whole thing is also this, is that, to me, the Detroit offensive line that Ben Johnson hopes to one day emulate here in Chicago, that was a solid group, but the reason that offensive line, first off, the reason that the running game looked so good is simply because they added Penei Sewell in 2021. And then you draft Jahmyr Gibbs in 2023, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had 2 years of that O-line working together in order to go ahead and really take that next step. And again, if you're not a O-line enthusiast like Nick and I are, the big thing to really understand is that scheme and cohesion go hand in hand with each other, right? Mm-hmm. But like your pass protection schemes, whatever that is, if it doesn't mirror what you're doing in the run game and a player's responsibilities as a pass protector in terms of the assignments that do change based on the front, if the assignments are not the same as you would generally have in the running game, your entire offensive line continues to go ahead and unravel. Now, the biggest thing with offensive linemen is this. Everyone from Bill Belichick to Andy Reid down to probably the person who's coached O-line for a few years in their life will tell you, you can never have too much cohesion with the offensive line. And so when your offensive line starts to gel together in terms of your pass protections, but then also your run game, the pass protection automatically gets easier. And I fully believe that there is why Jahmyr Gibbs has been a hell of a lot more effective than so many people are giving him credit for. But I also believe that if you were to take DeAndre Swift right now and put him behind this Detroit Lions offensive line, he would have a damn good impact, because he went to Philly the 1 year, popped off obviously, and had his best career season. So that's really what I ultimately believe is what it was, is the fact that it was just like, hey, DeAndre Swift can be really good. I look at Roschon Johnson and I say Roschon Johnson also has really underperformed, but again, it's because they didn't have an offensive line in front of him to begin with. And so I also believe that Roschon Johnson can be really good. Do they take another running back at 72 to have a three-headed monster? I still think that they should, whether or not that guy starts. Now, I'm going to be fully honest with you. Players slip and fall all the time. If it is one of the Ohio State guys at 72, I'm pulling the trigger ASAP. If it's Omarion Hampton or Caleb Johnson there, yeah, I could get behind those guys at 72, but I can't get behind any of them if it is 10th overall or at least 39th overall.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to touch on one thing that you had mentioned. The Bears lost. I'm digressing back a ways because you had mentioned a little bit here with Detroit and why their O-line was good with cohesion. You said at the dinner table today, you talked about the trenches is why Chicago lost in 2024. I agree, but I disagree. I think that they lost because of injuries in the trenches. And when Andrew Billings went down, defense went down. When Nate Davis, whatever happened there, when Ryan Bates, when Braxton got hurt, when Doug Kramer got hurt, when he came in and played, the amount of combinations, y'all, that they had was ridiculous. You look at Green Bay. I think Green Bay had 6 guys start a game this year. Chicago had 10. And then they had guys that had played and got hurt, and then to come back in, the injured guy had to come back in and play because the other guy that came in got hurt. It was ridiculous. Remember, Bill Murray got hurt. Tons of guys got injured.
Matt Pryor.
Yeah. Matt Pryor was a backup tackle, had to play guard. I mean, they were down to 5th string guys, I feel at some point. In terms of how it was actually supposed to go. I think that made zero cohesion happen. So when people are like, man, it was crazy, we really have to get the O-line. We have to get health on the O-line as part of this. And that a lot of teams don't have to deal with what Chicago had to deal with. You look at some of the best teams in the NFL, they had the most starts with all of the same group. It's not that they're all first-round picks, which is what I feel people are like, you have to have a first-round pick at left tackle and right. And no, you have to have guys that play together. They get better. They understand the schemes like you're talking about. Hey, I'm going to work off of this guy up to this backer because I know what you can take in terms of handling that guy versus this guy's brand new. I'm not sure how much he can handle, and I have to help him a little bit more. All those things go together that you can't when it's a brand new group every week or in a new series with a rookie going in there, or hey, this guy that just got signed had to go in there. So that's something I think that's really important that I think people need to understand too, is that we need a healthy offensive line and defensive line almost more than anything else.
That is a really good point. I'll be honest too. Like when I say trenches, I mean I'm focusing obviously on offensive, defensive line, but it just goes to show how like top heavy the roster was last year in terms of talent in those trenches. And that's why, to me, like circling back here to the 72nd overall pick, as well as some of the pro days, I mean, there were a lot of big pro days this week, right? You had LSU, you had Texas, Ohio State, obviously. Penn State's pro day is, if you're listening to this on a Friday morning, is actually going on as we speak. So there is, to me, a legitimate sort of conversation that needs to be had in terms of, all right, well, is it genuinely time for us to start saying that maybe this is the week that makes or breaks the Bears draft plans? Because to me, there's an argument to be made there, because you look at LSU, like LSU sending 2 solid offensive linemen to the draft, right?
Yep.
They're sending another really good tight end to the draft. You look at Texas, well, Matt Golden's got a top 30 visit lineup with the Bears. You've got Andrew Mbuka, who is the safety there, plus Alfred Collins, the D lineman. And then obviously Texas is sending Kelvin Banks Jr., another offensive tackle to the draft.
Well, and Jaden Blue, they had Eric Bieniemy there. Jaden Blue ran in 4.2s and 2.40s there. And that could be a guy that we're talking about at, I don't think he goes at 72, but probably maybe at the 5th round pick.
Yeah, 5'148", I think is what the Bears have. And the other big thing, is that Penn State, they've got Nick Singleton, who is...
He went back to school.
Oh, right, he did go back to school.
Yeah, him and Katron Allen. They're trying to do the Ohio State thing, like, hey, we're going to go back again. But I like Kevin Winston Jr. there in terms of a safety. Maybe that's a guy at 72. They've got a linebacker, maybe a late round linebacker that could go as well. I mean, they again, like big time programs produce, and that's another thing too that's interesting in terms of polls. This kind of went with these like smaller school guys. I wonder if it's going to be think of the theme of free agency has been like getting sure things. Besides Dio, Tooney's a sure thing. Jonah Jackson, Ben Johnson's worked with them. Sure
Drew
thing.
Dahlman, sure thing.
Yeah. Drew Dahlman. Yeah. So like, are they going to go maybe bigger programs instead of like trying to be? I feel like with 72 or with third rounds, you're talking about with polls before, it was like trying to be smarter than everyone else, trying to be a little bit too cute, which I think is, and again, I'm not just trying to throw shade. I feel like that's what Green Bay does all the time in first round. It's like it's a little bit of a reach, a little bit of a, an athlete guy, but I'm trying to be smarter than everybody, and it doesn't work out that often in terms of just going with the consensus top guy that's there, which is what Philly does with like every first round pick.
Just saying, in one of the group chats I'm in, which I'm in a lot of them, one of the things I said was this finally needs to be the year that the Packers take a wide receiver in the first round. And because I said that, I know for a fact it's not going to happen because they're going to invest in the trenches. Okay, but listen, so Ohio State also, I was talking to someone that actively covers Ohio State, and I asked the question, I said, hey, is this the best draft class that Ohio State has sent to the league in recent memory? And the response I got was yes, because you've got Donovan Jackson, you got Josh Simmons there as your offensive lineman, Emeka Egbuka as your wide receiver, which, again, part of the reason he went back is because he didn't want to be known as the other Ohio State wide receiver, because he was in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s shadow. You got Judkins, you got Kyle McCord as well. You've got Henderson. Tyleek Williams is a name that Bears fans you need to get more familiar with. And then JT Tolomolu and Jack Sawyer. And so I look at 72 and I start to say, hey, if one of these Ohio State guys is there, which let's just put some of these guys into tiers, of all the big schools that we just mentioned, if like a Kelvin Banks, a Will Campbell, not going to be there, right? Abdul Carter, not going to be there at 72. That much we know. I look at a guy like Emory Jones Jr., the tackle from LSU, Alfred Collins from Texas. Mm-hmm. I say Judkins and Henderson, both of those guys, lump them in as high tier 2 prospects. The other guy that I think is worth mentioning is Tyleik Williams, JT Tolomolu, and Jack Sawyer. All guys that I could see any of the three going anywhere from the second to the third round, which is why I fully believe that they are guys to get to know for 41 and 72.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, if you guys watched the video today, but Tyleik Williams pulled his hamstring, actually fell down during his 40-yard dash, but he later on was there, talked to people with thumbs up. So it sounds like it was just a hamstring. But I actually had this conversation with someone today in terms of where they like TJ, I think Sanders from South Carolina as a defensive tackle for Chicago. But you'd mentioned Alfred Collins and then, also Tyleik Williams. Those are one techs. And like when the defense went down, we just talked about this 5 minutes ago, Zach Pickens couldn't fill the void for Andrew Billings. They couldn't find someone to play that one technique, but that's what Tyleik Williams and Alfred Collins do. They're big. Think of like, not this big, but think of like the Keith Traylor, Ted Washington days. The big guy that takes on two guys that your linebackers can run because we know Edmonds struggles with taking on blockers. And then your one technique in terms of Dexter and Grady Jarrett, then they can, be more of a disruptor. So that could be that spot right there, man, of getting that one technique to let the whole defense kind of settle down. And,
you start to look at that sort of pick too. And to me, I'll be honest, like 39-41, I don't necessarily view as being wild cards. 10 and 72, I think are legitimate wild cards because you could go any direction with them. But then the other big thing to sort of look at with 72 overall is that maybe that is a pick where, as we start to wrap up the show here, the Bears trade out of and they move down a few spots just to be able to get some picks in round 4, but then also get an additional pick in round 4 or round 6 because the Bears don't have any 4th or 6th round picks this year, which would make a lot more sense because, again, if you are at 72 and you want to add that high risk, high reward guy, you don't want to spend a pick where you feel like value doesn't necessarily match position. Now, if Alfred Collins is there or one of the Ohio State running backs is there, I would definitely say go ahead and do it. But there's also, to me, plenty of reason to be concerned about what's available at 72 this year in the draft, knowing how thin it is, and then going ahead and countering that by trading out of there because some team could want to move up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you. And one of the things, too, that I truly believe just as a philosophy, I know, like, I play on the mock draft simulators all the time, and I post on Twitter, and, every time you post, it's like, that guy's not going to be there. But I'm like, okay, no one's ever happy with a mock draft. We all know that. But the one thing that I truly believe and why I trade down a lot is because the more picks that you have I know it's like fun to do picks, but the more picks that you have, it increases your odds of success, in my opinion, versus trading up. Because trading up, think of like the Bears. They traded up for Tevin Jenkins. It was like, man, this guy should have been a first-round pick. Oh, this is steal, whatever. That didn't necessarily work out, right? And you gave up additional picks later on to make that work. But there's always things that happen. Injuries, bad play, they don't develop, off the field. There's lots of things that can happen negatively. And the more prospects that you have, you don't know what makes guys tick, their work ethic, etc. So more spots that you can put players, and then someone does rise up and become a Braxton Jones, like the only player the Bears have developed as a late round guy in the last whatever amount of years. You get more chances at those. Think of in the past days, Eddie Jackson, Tariq Cohen, a long time ago, like Mike Green. Right? Like 7th round pick became a starting safety. The more bites that you get in terms of, or bites, more prospects, more picks that you get, the more increases your chances of success with developing guys. The Bears have not had picks. That's kind of been the issue. They've been trading those away. And I think acquiring more picks makes a lot of sense for this team.
And I would love to see this team trade down a few times maybe even more than once. But that's going to do it from us. We are well over our scheduled time limit, but Nick and I are super tired. I got to be up in 6 hours, I think, something like that. So make sure you're checking us out on Twitter at Nick Whalen, at _ Nick Whalen, at Usayd Koshul, at Halas. Check out the Bear Report as well on Twitter. Check out our website. Make sure you're checking out the Picks 4 Polls podcast. We're going to be back next week with 2 more episodes discussing a whole lot more as the calendar turns to April. The next time you hear from us, it should be April, by the way. But have a fun and safe rest of your day. Have a fun and safe weekend, ladies and gentlemen. Bear down. We'll see you next time.